Last year I started reading fantasy, and during the beginning of that journey I picked up The Priory of the Orange Tree, and it's a book I've been meaning to get to for months. It is, however, pretty chunky. It's over 800 pages, so that has kept me a little hesitant. I originally bought this thinking it was a standalone fantasy, which we do not have enough of, by the way, but it has since been announced that a prequel is being released in February 2023. So I knew that I wanted to get to this book before the prequel comes out so that I can know whether I want to dive into that as well, because I'm assuming it's going to be just as big. And I have decided that this is the week. This is the week I'm going to get through this, because due to circumstances, I have to have the next week off work. Also, I think this is the largest book I have on my TBR, so let's knock it out early. Let's get it out of the way in January so I can feel good about myself for the rest of the year. So it's huge and highly acclaimed, and I've got 6 days to spare. So let's get to reading. So I was finding the beginning quite difficult to get into. That's not to say that I wasn't enjoying what I was reading, I just found it like I had no idea what was going on. And I think one of the main reasons this book was so hard to sort of get into initially is the fact that there is a massive cast of characters. And right from the beginning, we're moving between 4 primary points of view, and these people are all in very different locations. Helpfully in the book, there is a guide to all of the characters, or all of the named characters. That is 15 pages long, so that gives you a sense of how many characters and names are just thrown at you. I think any book that is told from very separate perspectives, like that are like telling a different story essentially, or different parts of a story anyway, those books to me often can feel a little slow to get going, or at least a little slow to get into, because you kind of feel like you're in that introductory period for a lot longer than you would if you were just reading one perspective. So by the end of part 1, I still don't really feel like I know what's going on entirely, but I'm starting to feel like I have a little bit of a gist. Like I said, we have 4 main perspectives, 4 main characters that we're learning about and from. The first one, at least the one that I'm feeling most attached to at the moment, is Durian. I think she's from the south originally, and she's an initiate of the Priory of the Orange Tree, although we don't know a whole lot about that yet. But currently she's situated in the west, and she's living and working in the upper household of the Queen of Ines, Sabran. So she's sort of living this double life as a foreigner who's infiltrated the Queen's upper household, but she's there to protect the Queen. Because at least in her kingdom, there is a belief that as long as someone of her bloodline is alive, then the nameless one, the big bad, cannot return. So far Iyad's point of view has mostly been her balancing, her like need to fit in, but also of secretly protecting the Queen from any dangers and to learn about those dangers as well. Loth is one of our other main perspectives. He's an heir to one of like the wealthy northern provinces, but he's also a very close friend of the Queen. But some members of the Queen Sabran's court believe that his relationship with the Queen is sort of making it hard for her to find a suitor, to be able to find a suitable match, get married and have a child. So there's been a bit of a conspiracy, it seems, to send him away on an ill-fated quest. Niclais Roos is our third point of view. He seems to be like a bit older than the others, and he's this very learned doctor. He's an alchemist. He was exiled by the Queen after he promised her that he could make her an elixir of life so that she would never die and also therefore not have to bear an heir. She's really terrified of childbirth, so this was really appealing to her. But after being unable to make this elixir, she exiled him to a small island, and his only ticket off the island is basically being able to make the elixir, so that's what he spends his time doing. But he has gotten caught up in a situation of his own with our fourth point of view character, Tane. The East and West are very separated for political reasons, for religious reasons, and because of a draconic plague. Orisimar seems to be like the last point of contact between the two. It is part of the West, but they still trade with the East. Tane is from the East, and we meet her when she first stumbles across a foreigner, someone who's just sort of like washed up on the beach. And she knows she should turn him in to the authorities, but one, she sort of takes pity on him and she knows that he'd probably be killed. But also because the next day she is due to compete in a trial to hopefully become part of the High Sea Guard. And if the authorities find out that there is a threat of the draconic plague or whatever, she's worried that this won't go ahead. So instead, with the help of a friend, she manages to convince Niclais Roos to harbour this fugitive. After this, Tane goes off to her trial to become part of the High Sea Guard. The ultimate goal is to become a dragon rider. I sort of alluded to the very big differences between the West and the East in this world. There is also a South and a North, and I'm not really sure where everything fits in, but primarily we seem to be focusing on the West and the East at the moment. And these major differences all seem to converge around dragons. 1,000 years prior to our story, story, there was some kind of uprising of evil with the Nameless One. And the Nameless One, I think, is like either a dragon or a wyvern. I'm a little confused about the differences, although I feel like given that Lady Trent is one of my favorite series, I should be a little bit better versed in the differences between these two things. But anyway, in the West, in Virtudom, especially in the Queendom of Innis, there's a very strong belief that dragons, wyverns, they're all evil. They are all children of the Nameless One, essentially. Magic and sorcery are evil, and their religion very much reflects all of this. In the East, they see a difference between certain kinds of dragons as being separate from the Nameless One, and some dragons are actually revered as gods. And so there is a fundamental ideological difference between these two realms. But of course, this is an epic fantasy story, and so we are starting to see murmurings and suggestions that the Nameless One is returning to power. In the West, they believe that they're protected by their religion and by their queen Sabran, and hopefully whatever heirs she may bear. But not everybody is so sure that that's necessarily true. Okay, so I think that's a rough summary of where I'm at so far. So although we did have a slow start, I'm feeling pretty pumped now, and I'm fairly confident that we can still get this done in the next few days. So I'm up to part 5. I've read 620 pages of this thing, but I feel like we're about ready to head into the climax and the resolution, so I thought I should update you before I get there. I feel like at about 400 pages, I was in. I was having so much fun. And then by about 500, I started to get a little bit tired. This book feels at once too long and too short. And I don't know how I can justify that to you. I suppose it just feels like there is an awful lot of plot going on, but that we don't really dive very deeply into any of it. So for me as a reader, I think I would prefer the plot to either be simplified and spend a little bit more time with our characters and exploring what's really going on. Or I would like a series that just sort of allows the author to explore these things with a little bit more time. A lot has happened. We've had a coup, we've had assassination attempts, we've learnt more about historical murders that have influenced this time period. We've had a romance, we've had plenty of betrayal, we've got plenty of dragons, which is super fun, and it feels like we are hurtling very quickly towards the return of the Nameless One and potentially the end of the world. But ultimately, we still have a world that is very divided. Basically, all of these religions that I was sort of talking about earlier, they all ultimately believe that the Nameless One is bad. Nobody is out here believing that the Nameless One is good. But they all just have such fundamental different ideas about the original people, the founders of these different religions, and of course about dragons and magic. And there is starting to be that awareness for some of our characters that these divisions are only going to make defending the world against the Nameless One a whole lot harder. But old habits and old allegiances die hard. So yeah, a lot going on. How am I feeling about it all? I'll start with the fact that in the first part, it felt pretty evenly split between the 4 primary points of views that we were getting. Maybe Iad was we got a little bit more page time with her, but for the most part, it felt like we were getting a pretty broad spread of what these 4 characters were up to and where they were. Since the end of the first part and up to where I am now, it feels like the other 3 characters have just sort of dropped off for the most part, and now we're primarily in Iad's perspective. Part of me sort of appreciates that, if the other characters aren't doing anything that is central to the plot, I suppose we're just not finding out about it. We're not learning about them and what they're up to, which means we're not getting a bunch of maybe unnecessary details. But it does also leave me feeling why did I spend so much time with these characters before? I'm sure it's going to make sense at the end, but I suppose I don't really like that feeling of spending all this time trying to get my head around these different characters, where they're situated, what's going on with them, just to kind of leave them behind for several hundred pages. And I suppose that ties into my feeling of it being simultaneously too long and too short. Either I would like a couple of those perspectives just cut out and the author find some other way to bring them in, their necessary elements, bring them into the plot, rather than having them as a primary point of view in the first third of the book. Or I would like more time spent with those characters and to check in with them a whole lot more about what they're up to. Even if that thing is maybe not progressing their plot, we pretty much only spend time with characters when they are actively doing something that moves the plot forward, or they're planning to do something that moves the plot forward. And that is also true for the romance that's developed. I really like the romance. I kind of like both the characters, but I don't feel as invested as I feel like I should be, because even though we've spent a little bit of time together with them, it feels a little bit insta-lovey because we haven't spent a lot of time with them. And to be honest, I could not tell you why they love each other, what it is about these 2 characters that has brought them together in this kind of true love scenario. I don't know, I think it's kind of cute, but I'm not obsessed with it in the way that I want to be or that I feel like I should be. There have been a couple of reveals, especially around betrayal, that really did take me by surprise and I thought were very powerful. So I'm liking it and I'm really enjoying certain elements of it, but I'm not like in it as much as I was hoping to be in it by now. I don't know. I mean, I'm about to dive into what I think will be a pretty hectic rush to the finish line. So I suppose there's nothing left to do but to just get stuck in and to finish this thing. And I will check back in with you, hopefully tomorrow. I'm going to aim to finish this tomorrow. So, Booktube, you have some explaining to do. What the hell is this? I might be wearing my Love Heart t-shirt, but I should be wearing a hater hat because this what? How is this the thing that everybody is obsessed with? I don't understand. I'm sorry, I'm lost. I had honestly contemplated scrapping this entire vlog and just making a rant review because I felt like for so much of this vlog, you could see that I saw a lot of potential in this and I wanted to love it and I was hopeful that by the end I would. But the ending is the worst part of this whole thing. It's terrible. It is so derivative, and although there is an awful lot of plot packed in, I completely stand by what I said earlier in that this book, the pacing and like what is contained in this book, it doesn't work with the length. It either needs to be shortened and like slimmed down and focused, or it needs to be expanded. But as it stands currently as an 800-page book, this is so unsatisfying. So let's talk about one of the things that I did really like about this. This feels like a very classic standard fantasy, except for the fact that it is very women-centered. Most of the characters in this book, especially the ones that have a major impact on the plot or who feel central, are women. Additionally, while there are some themes explored around sexism and the way that women are treated and the expectations of women, especially around the expectation of child rearing, for the most part, I really did like that this feels like a classic high fantasy story, but where the oppression of women is not just played off as some grim, dark, like reality. I don't know. I liked that. I also liked that there was a sapphic romance, even if I didn't feel like that romance was very well developed. I also did like the exploration of religion, and in this world in particular, I sort of alluded to the fact that a lot of the different regions, they have a religion that is like founded on one event. It's just that all of these different religions have a very different interpretation and take on that event, which therefore means that the different regions have like idolized and deified different people and demonized different people from that founding event. So I thought there was some like interesting potential parallels for our world and Christianity or the Abrahamic religions. So a couple of interesting things that I did like: the women-centeredness and the religion, the exploration of that. However, my list of things that I did not like is an awful lot longer. And this is a heavy book, so I'm gonna put it down while we go through that list. Also, Ollie's sitting behind me playing with her pizza toy, so if you hear little squeaks, that's why. Ultimately, I suppose my major criticism comes down to the lack of development in this book. And that extends to pretty much all facets of the story, including the characters, the plot, the themes. They all felt very surface level to me. I think that is partly due to the fact that we had 4 points of view, and to me, ultimately they felt pretty unnecessary. Ead is our main character. Like, whichever way you want to spin it, Ead's the main character, and the other 3 characters do play their own role, but I think there would have been a way for the author to work in at least 2 of those characters in a different way that didn't require point of view chapters. Because we spent so much time flipping back and forth between 4 points of view for the first 250 pages, and then they just sort of disappeared, more or less, for like the middle third of the book, only then to sort of like show up again at the end to kind of save the day. It just felt like these characters didn't really matter. Our connection to them didn't really matter. Our involvement in their journey, which we just skipped over for half the book, didn't really matter. Instead, they just felt pawns to the plot. And that lack of character development that I feel really hindered my enjoyment of this book also extends to the lack of character development and just development in general around the antagonist, the Nameless One. We spend about 650 pages of this book being told that the Nameless One is returning. The Nameless One is returning. He's the big bad. But we don't know anything about him or his motivations or anything. Like, he has no character whatsoever. He is literally just a big bad evil dragon that's come to destroy the world. And he was probably in the book for, I don't know, it felt like 10 pages. It might have been a little bit more. But for an 800-page book, we did not get very much interaction with the antagonist of the entire story, which basically just felt like a lot of build up for very little payoff. And I suppose I'm talking about the ending, so I'll talk about the thing that really bothered me and sort of like made me realize how much I was not enjoying this story. And that was like to do with like the division in this world around their religious beliefs. I've spoken quite a few times about like the fundamental ideological shifts and rifts between the different peoples of this world, and how even though they have a common enemy, their beliefs and their religion are so fundamentally different that like we just can't see how they'll overcome these differences to come together to fight this big, bad, nameless one. But literally all it takes is for Loth to like just travel and ask one of the other kings, hey, like the nameless one is coming back, you should probably help us. And he's like, okay. Like it's literally one conversation and 1,000 years of division and isolation and nationalism are just like overcome, which like just feels so cheap when the whole world, the whole story, the whole point is like this hard division and overcoming such big intrinsic differences of 1,000 years, how hard that is for people. And it just takes one conversation between two men. That's it. That's the whole thing. Like, yes, it was a little bit of a quest to like get from one place to the other to have that conversation. But to me, like that conversation should have been a really difficult, hard fought one. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, I was just pissed. Can you imagine? Can you imagine our world coming together like from one conversation? Like no, absolutely not. And then of course the big bad, the nameless one, it turns out he's really easy to kill because one of the other dragons happens to know that he's like got a scale that was hurt a little while ago and never really healed. So as long as you stab him in that one spot, you'll be able to kill him. So like we're literally giving an X marks the spot for how to kill the big bad. And like it's all so easy. When we've spent 700 pages building up to how hard this is going to be, it's all done and dusted within the space of like 30, 40 pages, which just felt so unearned. We then get 4 chapters, one from each of our main points of view, just to make sure that their stories are all individually wrapped in a perfect little bow as well. So I am left once again utterly bamboozled by the booktube fantasy community. I can't for the life of me understand how this has gotten the kind of hype that it has. But to me, this is just so stereotypically cliche, derivative, basic fantasy with a big bad who literally has no motivation other than just like taking over the world because 1,000 years has passed and that's what he does. A literal X marks the spot way to kill him that is divulged at the perfect moment. A bunch of characters who, yeah, a couple of them I did start to kind of like, but like I didn't really get any time with them in personal, intimate moments, which left them by the end feeling like just shells of characters and very much just plot devices. And I guess I just had so much good faith trust that this was going to pay off, that this was going to earn its keep of 800 pages because it's so well loved and I wanted to love it too. And yet I am left absolutely gobsmacked. Is it a cool world? Kinda, but it's not very well fleshed out and like its literal fundamentals are just overridden for the sake of a quick, clean ending to the plot. Are the characters cool? Yeah, some of them, kinda. But again, we don't really get to see them grow and develop as people all that much. Was the plot interesting? I don't know. Is it? I mean, there's a lot of going back and forth and it feels like there's a lot of filler to make a seemingly interesting book. For example, like that conversation that was had between 2 characters to bring the world together to fight the nameless one. There was quite like a journey that character had to go on to get to the place to have that conversation. But to me, that felt like a substitute for actually doing the hard work of bringing a world together. Are the dragons cool? Yeah. Kinda, but in the way that dragons are always cool. Like, dragons are cool. You can't really mess up a dragon. And yet, somehow, I still feel so disappointed in the nameless one because he was on the page for like maybe 15 pages and I know nothing about him other than that he's evil because the book told me he is. So I'm even a little bit disappointed in the dragons. Okay, I am gonna stop yelling at you now and ask the question. The whole reason that I'm reading this book now is because the prequel is coming out in February. And so the question is, will I be ordering, will I be buying, will I be reading that prequel? So part of me still wants to say yes because that cover is so damn pretty and part of me always wants to have a redemption arc for an author. But then I remembered that prequel is also 800 pages long. And like, do I want to do this to myself again? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I am very sad that I didn't like this. I honestly thought I was going to love it. I thought it would be so fun and I was really excited that this, even though it's now not a standalone, like retrospectively we've got a prequel, it was written as a standalone and this does very much read as a standalone. And like I said at the beginning, we don't have enough of that in fantasy. And so I liked the idea of having a really good, solid fantasy story that could stand on its own 2 feet. All right, well, I'm sorry, I guess, for like the trajectory of this vlog. I hope you still got something out of it. I'd love to hear in the comments below if you've read this book and what you thought of it, or if you haven't yet read it, like, are you going to? A big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon who know that I can be pretty passionate about the books that I don't like, and especially big thank you goes to Olivia, Lynette Brown, and Marie for their very generous support. And of course, a big thank you to you for making it all the way through this video. I hope you enjoyed hanging out. I will see you again in the next video, and I'll talk to you in the comments. Until then, happy reading. Bye.